So I'm going to present, the big idea of what I'm going to present is that education is more effective when it is relevant. And to be relevant means that it is connected to helping learners understand and address challenges that matter. The implication for learners at the K through 12 level of that idea is that we should first think, when we think about curriculum, we should first think about what is the world we want our students to build? What are the problems we want them to be able to address? And from there, we can then ask the question, and what are the capacities that they need to understand, care about, and make a difference in those problems? If we do that, then any curriculum that we design is going to be based on two hypotheses. One, if our students learn a particular set of competencies, they will have the following consequences for themselves and for the communities of which they are a part. The second hypothesis is, if we teach in a particular way, if we engage our students in a particular set of activities, they will develop these competencies. It is essential that educators are intentional in formulating and testing those hypotheses. And that is also a difficult task. And it's a task that is best accomplished collaborating with colleagues, working with others. So to summarize my big idea, begin with big goals, goals like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. From there, draw the competencies that students need to develop. From there, build a curriculum to do that. And then evaluate, am I succeeding? And don't do that alone. Do that in the company of a network of colleagues. So now that I've told you the big idea, I'm going to explain that idea, and I'm going to offer some resources that can help you implement that big idea in practice. And then I want to hear from you. How do you think that could work for you? So let me start with a slide. I'm going to talk about the role, therefore, of curriculum design, interdisciplinary curriculum design, to support powerful pedagogies so we cultivate tolerance, or what I call global citizenship, among our students. Now that idea is not entirely new. The idea that we should be able to see the world through the eyes of another across all lines of difference, that idea is at least 2,000 years old. This man who was born in Morocco, Terence, and who came to Rome, where he was for a period of his life a slave to a Roman senator, who was so impressed by the talent of this man that he gave him his freedom, and he became a playwright, and he wrote 6 plays. And in one of his plays, this man Terence says, to be human is to live so that nothing human is foreign to us. I was listening to the Minister of Tolerance this morning, and I thought, many of the ideas he's presenting are the ideas Terence had 2,000 years ago. But even though the aspiration is old, we haven't always known how to make that aspiration a reality. I thought, until yesterday, that it was only in 1947 that humanity developed a consciousness that we were united in this planet, that there were many, many ties that bonded us to others. And I thought the event that caused us to see that was the transmission of satellite images to Earth from the first satellites. But yesterday I took some time to visit the Louvre exhibit, which is an amazing exhibit because it is curated to help make visible the connections across civilizations going back thousands of years. And after looking at that exhibit, I thought maybe it didn't happen in 1947. Maybe it happened in the 1500s as a result of this increase in trade connecting different civilizations that at least help those who were involved in that activity understand the points of commonality they had with other civilizations. So I may need to revisit this idea. At any rate, you all know that about 20 years ago, a number of developments around the world, I think mostly the development of technology, caused governments and individuals and international development organizations to ask themselves, what should we help students learn so they can function in the 21st century? And I think the event that precipitated that, if you remember, in the mid-1980s, the microchip was invented. Microchip was invented a little later. We already had computers towards the end of the 1980s. We had the microchip. And with that, it was clear. Why don't you join us? Come over here. We have a seat for you. And with that, and please join us. Absolutely, come over here. With that, it was clear that the production of things was going to change, and the way in which we connected with one another was going to change. Of course, we didn't have iPhones at the time. We didn't have internet. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Facebook. But people realized things are going to change. And governments began to produce white papers saying, how should we educate people for this new world? What are the capacities? Most of you are too young to remember that, but I'm not, because I participated in some of these conversations. In the early 1990s, mid-1990s, UNESCO put together a commission called the Commission for Education in the 21st Century. And that commission organized tens of consultations, spent 3 years in consultations. I participated in 2 of them, of philosophers, educators, business leaders, civic leaders, trying to understand what are these capacities. And the product of that work was the report, also known as the Delors Report, Learning the Treasure Within. And that report argued that learning, which until then, in the eyes of many people, was mostly about the development of cognitive skills, had to emphasize 4 sets of skills. And it called them learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. Incidentally, UNESCO has just appointed a commission on the futures of education that is going to try to update that work. But UNESCO has only done that in its 70-year-old history 3 times. The first time in 1972, the second time this report was published in 1997, and the third time now. So everything that your various ministers were talking about this morning, this breadth of skills, is something we have been discussing for 2 decades with increasing urgency, Now, I think the conversation about skills is an incomplete conversation because it doesn't connect with, and what kind of world do these skills lead to? I think that the place to begin this conversation is with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Because the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which, as you know, were adopted at the UN General Assembly in September of 2015, represent a very hopeful vision of a world that is inclusive, of a world that is sustainable, of a world where we can live in peace with one another. And there is no question that none of these goals cannot be achieved if schools don't take up the responsibility of helping students develop the capacities necessary to produce a world without poverty, without hunger, with health for everyone. So that is my suggestion this afternoon, that what we should be doing in schools is, first of all, translating these goals into a framework of competencies for our students, and then taking that framework and translating it into a curriculum, into an actual curriculum. Now, one of the things that informs this work is the Global Education Innovation Initiative, which I lead at Harvard, which is a research and practice consortium that has the goal of helping to transform education so that it can provide students an opportunity to develop the capacities they need to participate civically and economically in the 21st century. And we do 3 simple things, and this book is a product of one of them, this book that you have received. So the first thing that we do is applied research. The second thing we do is we convene, we promote informed dialogues. And the third thing we do is we develop curriculum. And the curriculum we develop, which I'm offering to you, is one of the ways to bring to practice this idea I am suggesting of beginning with the end in mind and then go from the end to actual pedagogy and instruction. So very briefly, because it's not the subject of today's conversation, on the applied research, we have published 3 books. And by the way, the first 2 are translated into Arabic. The first one is a synthesis of what are these capacities of the 21st century and an analysis of how curriculum can provide the opportunity to build them. So the book is called Teaching and Learning for the 21st Century. Our second book is an analysis of programs of teacher professional development that do an exceptional job building the capacities of teachers to develop these 21st century skills. That book was just published. I'm delighted you're with us. Welcome. And the third book is an analysis of the impact of one innovative pedagogy, a program of entrepreneurship education implemented in high schools in the Middle East. So it's an evaluation of what impact does that program have in 6 countries in the Middle East, including the UAE, but also including Oman and Morocco and Saudi Arabia and other places. The second set of things that we do, not so relevant to today's conversation, is to basically bring together practitioners and make visible what they know about how to transform education systems. Third set of things we do is to develop curriculum, and we have written 3 books. They are available in multiple languages. These books are being used at the moment in thousands of schools in a variety of different countries, in the private schools, public schools, and network of schools. And so the very first book is the one in the middle. It's a book that contains 350 units, and they are aligned with the UN SDGs. As I was listening to the Minister of Tolerance, I thought, this is the curriculum to achieve those goals. But this is not a curriculum that I recommend that you try, because it's a very difficult curriculum to teach. For most teachers who haven't been doing these, they're going to see this book and they're going to say, this is good, but not for me. The book that is easier to teach is the one on the left, which is the one that is being translated here. By the way, those 2 are translated, the first one and the second. Actually, all of them are translated into Arabic, all of these books. So I'm going to say a few words about how we developed that book, but what I would love is to get your curiosity about perhaps trying these lessons in your schools, about using this book as a starting point to put in practice what I am proposing as a big idea, which is that you should bring these big challenges and these big aspirations reflected in the UN SDGs to your schools, to the task of developing curriculum. So how did we develop the World Course? You can also find it online as an app. So the organizing principles were very simple. We said begin with the end in mind. This is outcomes-based. Second, it is project-based. Third, emphasis is on getting students from kindergarten to high school to be producing all the time. This is not about teaching students to be spectators, to be sitting and listening. This is about getting students to be makers, to be doers all the time, to learn to make a difference. The emphasis is not only on cognitive development, but on this breadth of skills that is the focus of the global initiative: attitude, skills, and knowledge. Each year, there is a capstone. The idea is that students are engaged in an activity that extends throughout the year, at the end of which they produce something which they present. I have, 15 minutes left? 10. Which they present to their families and so on. There are coherent yearly themes. The units are interdisciplinary. There is new knowledge and new content. Bottom line is we're trying to cultivate agency. The idea is to teach kids to learn from what works, help them develop an innovative and entrepreneurial spirit, engage the parents and the community as resources, as partners of the teachers. The emphasis is to develop a breadth of skills, the breadth of skills we were talking about. The global challenges are the focus, and human rights are the focus of that curriculum. The curriculum has many connections between the local and the global. Engage kids with complex issues. Understand that children are smart. From kindergarten, they are smart. And teach them as if they were smart. I find that too much curriculum is infantilizing, assumes that kids are capable of a lot less than they actually are capable of. And then go from things that are personal and immediate to more advanced and conceptual understanding. So let me now, for each of these capacities, we break them down into a total of about 180 constructs. So for example, we say for intercultural competency, that involves interpersonal, intrapersonal, ethics. For knowledge and skills, we deal with economics, culture, politics, science and technology. Heavy emphasis on science in this curriculum, science and technology, public health, demography, business, and then work and mind habits. And for each one of them, we break them down into something very specific, which can be observed, which can be assessed, right? So for example, interpersonal intercultural competency, the student is able to recognize and weigh diverse cultural perspectives. The student understands their own identity as well as the identities of others, and so on and so forth. So that is part one of the big idea. Develop curriculum in this way. But doing this will not be easy if you try to do it alone. So you should do it in good company. And the second piece of the big idea is, here is a protocol for how to organize yourselves to work with colleagues within your schools and across schools so you can become better at doing that. I think that the worst enemy of innovation is the desire of perfection. If you're trying to do something like teaching in a new way, it would be very tempting to be afraid to make mistakes. And it would be very natural to say, I'm going to wait until I have a perfect way to do that. And that would be the sure way to fail, because you will never do it. It'll never be perfect. The approach I'm suggesting is begin somewhere. Learn from what you did, and then revise and do it again and make it better. Essentially, the process is one of continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is a road to perfection rather than the aspiration for perfection. And to have a process of continuous improvement, we suggest a few steps. I'm going to skip over some of that because I do want to have a little bit of conversation with you. Oops, you realize that I planned I was going to have 50 minutes. I don't know what made me think that. So this is what the units look like. I don't need to show you that because you have them in the book. You have a copy of that. These are the themes that we explore in the book. But I want to get to the second piece, which is how do you organize yourselves in a school to do that? It's very simple. So that is the theme of this second book, 60 Lessons. This book has a protocol that tells you how do you go from the SDGs to competencies, from competencies to curriculum. And these are the steps. First one, put a team in charge in the school. Change doesn't happen unless there is someone in charge. It shouldn't be a person, it should be a team. So decide who's going to lead this change in your school. Number two, that team should spend some time studying the SDGs. What are they? What do they mean? What indicators exist? What resources exist out there to teach about them? Step three, develop that framework of knowledge, skills, and disposition. What does a graduate look like? And you don't need to start from zero. We offer a framework in the book. You could begin with that and then change it and make it your own. Make your own revision. Next, examine what are you already doing in the school that is aligned with that framework. So you build based on your strengths. You build on top of what you're doing already. Next, design a prototype. Decide what are we going to do next year. And maybe all you're going to do next year is teach 5 lessons. Set a goal. Try it. Then communicate that vision to everyone in the school and to the parents so everyone is on board. Then make a decision, identify what you need, develop a framework to monitor implementation, develop a communication strategy, design a strategy of professional development. How are you going to build the capacities of teachers to do that? Do it, evaluate, and then do it again. And these are 3 years of continuous improvement in a school, but if you have multiple schools doing that, then what you have built is an improvement network that makes it possible for every school to gain every year as many years of experience as you have schools in the network. And the framework we're proposing offers a language, a common language, a common set of tools that actually enables that kind of collaboration across colleagues and across schools. That's all I had to do. You'll recognize their ideas based on design thinking, but it's really simple what I'm proposing. It's simpler than it seems. I can tell you that having worked now with thousands of teachers in many different countries, this is what I have learned. When teachers decide to do that, many of them remember why they came into teaching. Most people go into teaching because they believe they can make the world better through education. But there is something in this job that causes many people to forget that this is what the enterprise was about. And when you engage them in an activity that makes visible, how do you go from what you do to actually producing a world without poverty, advancing the human rights of all, that activates the intrinsic motivation of many teachers. I have also found out that the activity of building a network of colleagues within and across schools has the effect for many teachers of teaching them a different way to do their work. I have worked with teachers in very prestigious private schools who tell me this is the very first time in the 15 years I have been teaching in this school that we all come together to talk about what are the goals that we have for our students, what are we trying to achieve, and it's very powerful. I've also found out that it's not easy for most teachers to go from the Sustainable Development Goals to developing a framework of competencies, which is why having a community of peers can be helpful. So that's all. The big idea is not mine, it's the idea of Terence, who said 2,000 years ago, to be human is to live so that nothing human is foreign to us. I believe there could be no more important goal for education than actually provide students with experiences that help them develop the capacities to live in that way. And I think this is within reach. I think you can do it. So I'm all ears. I'm very interested in your reactions to these ideas. Thank you. What do you think? Are you going to try? You are what? Yeah. But I think you can do this in many subjects. You can do this in physical ed. You can do that in arts education. I think that, well, you can think about how do you help your students study where the different exercises that they do come from. Look at the roots of the exercises that they're doing, and in that way, help them connect with history. And maybe connect them with students in other institutions, in other places, and help them. The best coaches that I know are the best guides of the development of the character of their students. I have two sons who went to school. They were both involved in athletics. And the athletic coaches really get to earn the trust of their students in ways that sometimes other teachers don't. So they have the capacity to develop these sensibilities more than others. The coaches that my kids had engage them in all kinds of activities, community service. It wasn't just actually doing athletics, doing all kinds of things. So I'm sure there is a way. But my invitation with this curriculum, remember, is interdisciplinary. My invitation is not that the PE teacher works alone, but that you invite your colleagues to a conversation, the math teachers, the science teachers, the Arabic teachers, and that together you talk about how are you going to help your students develop the capacities to do that, and how can your work in your space connect with what your colleagues are doing in different places. So I'm confident there is a way, and I'm also confident that you can find it. And I think it'll be easier to find it if you do it with your colleagues. So I know I'm not giving you a complete answer. Thank you. Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. Other reactions to these ideas? Maybe they're not as big as I think they are. Maybe you tell me we're all doing this already. This is what we do in our schools. Speak up a little bit so I can hear you. Please do. Tell us, what grade do you teach? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Wonderful. Yeah. You taught them Rousseau? Yeah. And were they learning the history of art or were they themselves painting? Right. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, exactly. But you see the power of having a community? What I'm proposing is we need to build this community in every school. And we need to find a way to create connections across schools because we can all learn from one another. And we can together think about how do we do things that are indeed difficult. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying this is difficult. And difficult problems need collective intelligence. And nowadays we have the means to organize collective intelligence. Exactly. Which I think is what's great about this conference, is that it gives us a chance to learn from one another. Yeah. 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 You lose the meaning, right? But maybe one of the things you can do, I'm not suggesting you ignore your ministry. You might lose your jobs if you do that. But I am suggesting you create an activity that can help you understand what is the meaning behind these things. So maybe for you, the way to begin is you begin looking at the existing goals and establishing connections between them and the SDGs. And then maybe you find some gaps. And I suspect the ministry would not object if you said, listen, we have identified that developing empathy is really important and it's not an objective and we're going to make it an objective. I don't think anyone would be upset. You could tell them, hey, I think I'm doing what the Ministry of Tolerance is saying we should be doing in this country. And absolutely, I think you have to begin with your conditions, with your reality, but you should not let that reality rob you of your agency and of your professionalism. Because once that happens, you will lose the intrinsic motivation. This will then become a job and not a life's call. And I think what is essential is to reclaim this profession as the most important work a society has. You are building the architects of the future, the people who are going to invent the future. But that's not going to happen if you take these as, I'm just following somebody else's recipe. You are the experts and you need to bring to this enterprise your mind, your heart, and your hands. That's what I'm suggesting. And I think activities of that sort are a way to help us do that. You wanted to say something? You're just thinking. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 So let's test how powerful it is. Today at 4 o'clock, I'm going to have a very short session just outside talking about this book. And we will give copies of that book. So I ask you, if you are on those platforms and there are other people here, invite them to that session. Because right now, I believe with Margaret Mead that there is nothing that a small group of people cannot achieve. I believe you could transform education in Abu Dhabi if you set your minds to it. You have the power to do that. But if you brought more people to the enterprise, it would take less time. And so maybe you can bring some people to join me at 4 o'clock, where I'm not going to repeat this talk, but I'm going to say a few words about this particular book, and people will get copies of that book. And there are tons of copies outside. You know the big shelves? There are copies there. It's empty now? Good, I'm very happy to hear that. So invite people to get a copy because that gives you a starting point for a conversation. My goal is not necessarily that people teach the lessons that I develop with my team. My goal is that they develop lessons in that way, beginning with a real discussion and thoughtful reflection on what are the goals, what are we trying to do. And I think it is that reflection that helps you connect your own values, your emotions, and your brain to the enterprise, and therefore bring the best of yourselves. So I think we have to end now. I am very grateful for your interest, for the time, but I'm especially grateful for the work that you do every day. It is the best goal. It is, I truly believe that the work that you're doing is planting the seeds of peace in the next generation. And so if we have any hope to have a world like that, is because the work that you do. And the fact that you're curious to reflect about that work and try to become even better reinforces my belief of how wonderful a profession this is. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, thank you.